Alright, so today we are making techno drum from scratch. Obviously, if you make dub techno and if you make hard techno, the drum pattern will be completely different. So that's why today I'm gonna use peak time techno as a middle way, but obviously I will always give you tips for each techno subgenre. Now this video is more beginner friendly, but obviously I will always give you tips to experiment, make things more interesting, so that can be as well a good video if you are already experienced producer. Now keep in mind this is a tutorial to explain you the bass, so I will always recommend to experiment, do your own way. You don't need to follow exactly things how I say to do. Remember, experimentation is key. That being said, let's jump into Ableton. Now, before to start, one tips, remember that sound selection is very important and making sure you build the drum and you add layer of drum that always fit the track perfectly. Now, obviously, sometimes inspiration strikes and you don't really want to spend 5 minutes to select the open hat, then just grab a loop of a sample quick and you can come back to it later. But personally, I always start a track with the drum, so I make sure every time I add a drum, it fits perfectly the rest of the track. And this is really important because we often think that we can fix this at the mix, but it actually has to be fixed here by picking up the right sample. Now we're gonna create a pattern from scratch, but obviously for the sake of the tutorial and to be easier to understand, I will add one layer after another. But keep in mind when it's about groove, you have elements interacting with each other, so you can always go back and change a pattern to make sure it fits the rest of the track. Depending on the techno subgenre, this is very important, especially like for hypnotic or hard groove stuff. So yeah, keep that in mind. All right, so we're gonna start with the kick. I'm just gonna start with a sample and I'm gonna right click, group into a drum rack. I prefer like this to create pattern, and then I will just have the classic 4/4 kick. Now if you make hard techno, you might have a double kick sometimes playing as well, so you have something more like this. One of the things is you can play with the velocity. You can obviously change wherever you want on the pattern. Sometimes you can even do that here and here like this. Now if you do that, I recommend you do it only on the last bar, and I will keep the 3 first bar straightforward as it doesn't get too repetitive. Okay, that's not part of the tutorial, but to make things grooving a little bit more, I'm gonna add this rack rumble. I put it in the description if you wanna grab it. It's a free rack I made. Just gonna add a bit of rumble. On top of that, I'm gonna add this bass sound from an upcoming wavetable present coming soon, which sounds like this. Okay, just add the sidechain and the low cut, and okay, just to get things slow going, and so like this we can layer our drums on top. All right, now we're gonna add some close hat, and we're gonna just drop here and again right click, go to drum rack. I do that because it's easier than to layer and to write the pattern. So hats are really what detect the groove, but also the energy. Through your track and your arrangement, you will have a part with lower energy, part with higher energy, with like kind of the climax of the track, and hats really support that. So for example, you could have a bit with just the closer hat at the intro that sounds like this. And then same beat, same track, but with more hats during the climax of the track, that sounds like this. So we have our close hat. So we're gonna create a MIDI clip which is 1 bar length. Make sure the grid is in 1/16. So basically you have your kick playing in 1, 2, 3, 4. And the most classic will be basically off beat, so exactly between 2 kicks. Now, note position is really important. You can select all, press option, and then you can basically easily duplicate. And if you press alt, you can change the velocity. So I like to do that. Playing with the velocity is very important as well. So basically the one off beat, which has a higher velocity, is kind of the accent, which is gonna give this impulse you're gonna hear. Another thing you can do, true for any drums, you can select all the drum by clicking here. And you have here now in Ableton this grid and this percentage, which is gonna shift a little bit of the grid you note, and that's great to add a bit of swing, a bit of groove. So if you go too much, it doesn't sound good, but a little bit doesn't hurt. Another thing you can do with hats, which is very interesting, is to play with the GK. So I'm gonna bring down the sustain. And you can automate that either along the track, or you can use the envelope in Ableton. You could have, for example, the one offbeat a little bit with a stronger decay. So let's put this like this, and then we can just duplicate. Now, another cool way to make your hat pattern a bit more interesting is to add a bit of delay, because basically a delay is just gonna repeat the note over time, and depending on the time, it kind of just add more notes, if we can say so, at a different position and create nice groove. So I made this track again, I will put the link in the description, which is called Hat Shuffle, and it's basically 4 delay presets that I know work well with hat, and you will hear how they affect the hats. With the delay, it's almost like we are adding a layer of hat at playing at a lower velocity. And you can obviously play with different delay too. So here again, you could, for example, at the intro, just have the classic without the delay. And then the track progresses and you want to add a bit more energy. Tack, you engage the delay. Okay, let's remove for now and let's talk about pattern, because now different pattern will create different energy and you can play with that. I'm gonna press B and you can have your classic 16 closer hat pattern, which is kind of a straightforward, which honestly work well like this. Now again, you can play with the velocity and you can say the one offbeat with a stronger velocity. You can do what I like to call a crescendo, which is basically you have the one on the beat at a lower velocity, the one off beat at a stronger velocity, and the one in between, well, with the beat velocity in between as well. Let me shorten it. And then you can even play with the last one now, lower how it was, mid velocity, or higher velocity. Or even combining, you duplicate and you have one at the lower velocity, one. So just with that, you can really get very creative. It really depends what type of energy you wanna do with your hats. Here are other hat patterns that you could use. Some of them might work better with a bit of delay. Okay, you get the idea. If you're interested in this file, I will put them for my Patreon. If you want to subscribe to my Patreon, it's a great way to support me. Another cool thing you can do with Close Eye Hat, it's actually having 2 different hats, but the second one is just more like playing just once every bar or so. We have our pattern here, and maybe we can add another Close Eye Hat at the end. Obviously, you can experiment. I'm gonna go back with our classic like this, kind of straightforward. I really like to do that with Close Eye Hat. Okay, cool. Now let's talk about open hat, and I'm gonna use this one. And basically, open hat is the same as Close Eye Hat in terms of note position, delay, velocity, swing. The classic open hat is usually offbeat. Might get rid of the delay. Now, one thing you could do as well, because on a real Charlie, you know, you cannot have Close Eye Hat and open hat in the same time, so you could use what we call choking. You need to go to your input output here and set it up here if you want one. And you can hear now the Close Eye Hat is choked compared to this. Not gonna use it for now because I really like when it's not choked actually, but yeah. That's something you might want to do. Now, there is one thing with open hats. I feel like with modern track, you often have, like especially in peak time and kind of industrial hard techno, a kind of a massive open hat. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels like more kind of a layer hat with a lot of energy and texture. So we're gonna do that now. We're gonna layer different open hats. And the idea to have open hat is kind of different texture. So maybe one more like this. One more bit of noisy, bit of crackling. One very noisy. One more kind of classic metallic hat. This one I like because it got a longer tail. And finally this one as well, kind of metallic hat. So the idea is to make them play all in the same time off beat. Like that. And yeah, it sounds like this. You can hear, you could have your classic open hat at the beginning of the track and your intro. And then you want to add an extra driving effect. And then you add this open hat. Now you might need a bit of trial and error to know which hats to layer or no. What I like to do as well is some of them maybe to add a bit of stereo. So you can use a widener. So for example, this is like it's basically a delay that I use as a hat effect. It's a free rack I made. I will put it in the description as well for it. Yeah, basically this one you're gonna put it on the side. So with the other, you know, add a bit of stereo and make it sound bigger, wider, more powerful. You can do it on the whole process actually as well, because you will have your classic open hat in the middle with this one, and then you will have all of you layered more in the stereo. This is up to you, we're gonna see later. Alright, now there is one thing which is missing, which is a bit of reverb. So for this hat, it's like with the ride, I will have maybe something with a longer decay than usual. Because you don't mind to have this little tail on the background, it really adds a nice groove. For closer hat, open hats, it's really depends. There is some genre like in dub, deep, who sometimes having a closer hat into a lot of cavernous reverb really work well because it's the ambient style. This really depends what you're looking for. Like here I'm gonna go more for a kind of a room, so something where you can hear there is some reverb, but like you can hear it in the subtle way. You don't want to be overpowering, you don't want a too long tail because it's gonna mess up with everything. See, this is too much. I can reduce the decay, I can reduce the diffuse. Not even necessary, I'm just gonna leave it, but you see, it's just to put the hat into a room. Now with this layer of hat, there is something I like to do. You can have your open hats like very percussive, but you can see, for example, this open hat, there is a kind of a fade in, a bit of attack. And I like to do that on the hats, on the open hat, because it kind of create a bit of aspiration. I don't know how to explain it. So now I want to do this to all the things. So there is a cool feature here. You can just put fade in, usually around 20-30 milliseconds, work well. And then the cool thing you can do in Drumrack, you can just right click and copy value to siblings. And now all of you elements have 30 milliseconds. So you don't have to do manually. And now you have open hats like this. I'm gonna add a bit of delay, maybe just a one to answer the. It's just like that. But it's not even necessary, to be honest, but yeah, something you can consider. Now here again, in terms of pattern, we have this. But you can get creative and have, like with the closer hat, one on the beat with a lower velocity and one off beat with a kind of accent to give an impulse. One pattern I like is to use like I showed the crescendo, which is kind of creating a kind of shaker effect. Compared to, so this is something I will do sometimes in the track. I will have one part with just the offbeat, and then later on, if I need to add extra energy to the track, I jump into that. You can even add some sidechain on it because it's quite a noisy one to add a bit of extra groove. Now I'm gonna talk briefly about shaker because it's pretty similar to this layer of beat. Some genre like melodic techno, melodic house, afro house. And here again, I recommend to layer different shaker to play in the same time, do the trick with the attack envelope. And if you take the same pattern, this basically just gonna add an extra layer of noise. So here I just copy the pattern and you can see. So for example, if you do melodic techno, maybe skip this one and just keep like this. If you do more peak time or industrial or hard techno, this can be great to have different layer of high energy hats, for example. you know, you really have to have this wall of hats, so put them maybe more in stereo and so on. Now, if you do melodic techno or more like ambient, you can really play with different pattern, again, play with the velocity, but different shaker. And that can really create different type of shaker sound. So now I'm playing it a little bit too fast because we are 135, but if you are playing at 125, 128, 120, it should be perfect. I'll just show you the pattern so you can recreate them. We're gonna keep this one for now. Okay, let's talk about ride. Again, you have to make sure you pick up one which fits perfectly. So a few things. First, with ride, you will have your classic offbeat. Now, a few things. First, when you put it in the sampler like this, or in a simpler, you have this retrigger mode, which means that every time a note is playing, the sample is going back to the minimum. It doesn't play entirely, which gives something like this. If I remove the retrigger and bring up the release, obviously, now I have the sample playing the all way through. And what we're gonna do, we're just gonna basically take our process chain from, let's say, the shaker, and we're just gonna select and copy paste. Okay, and the thing is, we're gonna get rid of the stereo width for now. We're gonna add a bit of reverb, and we need this time a pretty long reverb. So this you have to adjust. But you're gonna hear the difference with and without. Now you can add as well a bit of delay. But obviously, because you already have a long reverb, it's not always necessary. What you can do though is add stereo. There is two reasons why I will add stereo. The first one, the main reason is because, I don't know, somehow the ride in stereo sounds better. I really like how it sounds, the stereo ride. I don't know why. Secondly, obviously you already have your close hi-hat, open hats and stuff a lot in the middle, so putting them on the side makes space, allow to each element to be heard properly. Now, there is one thing which is missing, which I like to do, is here as well add a bit of sidechain, just to get things a bit more groovier. So this depends, you can abuse it or you can be a bit more subtle. It depends the techno genre, what you are looking for as well. Me, I like a little bit in between, but again, depend the genre. Sometimes you want just a heavy sidechain. Now, this was a classic pattern. You can obviously, again, because it's a hat, kind of, so follow the same pattern that we saw before with the open hat, the closed hat. With one of the beat at a lower velocity and the one of beat at a stronger velocity. You can do the double as well like this, or the progressive. You can have one playing on the beat or playing both. Like this. Again, a lot of possibility. What I like to do is to use the reverse ride. So I'm gonna use exactly the same sample. I'm just gonna right click and reverse the sample. I'm gonna warp it, so like this I can have like the bar, and usually if you stay around here 1.4, maybe put in the shot, so like this I have the fade in, it's easier. And I will put here on the beat. So what's happening is that, let me actually remove this. You kind of have a reverse before the ride hit. You hear this kind of reverse effect? Then you can adjust the fade, but... And usually this works well. one thing with the ride sometimes is the pitch of the ride. It's a bit hard to nail, and I don't really like to use the transpose because it sounds always weird. So I like to use shifter, not the pitch, because again the pitch is very weird, but with the frequency shifter it's usually really nice. Just a little bit you have to go. Sometimes work well to work with the wide, but because I have a stereo widener already. So one thing actually I like to use fine. And you can automate that. Sometimes you can have moment like at the end of the bar you can pitch it down, or you can pitch it up, or you can have moment in the track with the pitch normal and moment with a bit higher. You can automate that with the LFO as well. That's working well here. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of it for now. I like how it is now, but yeah. Alright, now let's talk about the clap. I'm gonna load the clap. So this is sometimes a bit tricky to find the right clap which fit the track, especially there is something with clap. So usually you're gonna put your clap every 2 beats. So you have once with the kick without clap and the second kick with the clap. Now there is 3 things to get right: the pitch, being at the right volume, and sometimes shifting it a little bit help as well. So there is this thing with the position. Let me actually remove a bit of first the volume. And you're gonna hear, actually I'm gonna remove the closer hat. And you're gonna hear when I start to slowly shift it, how it sounds. Here. Compared to. So this is very used, especially if you do melodic techno, house, melodic house. It's kind of having this clap a little bit off the grid just before the kick to kind of get this snappy effect with the clap. So this, getting the right pitch, well here. Here I like the pitch. One thing can help as well sometimes is the clap is just too long. So you can just like reduce the decay. What you can do as well, because this can get very boring, so you can have, for example, every 2 clap playing, your clap is changing slightly. So can be the pitch or can be the GK, you can automate that. And it's just to have the subtle variation. For example, the first one is gonna be a little bit shorter. But you can play with an extra layer. For example, you could have another layer underneath playing just there, but at a slower volume to barely hear it. It's just to kind of you have to be very subtle, because otherwise if it's too obvious it will be more disturbing than really helping to don't be too monotonous. Now in terms of pattern, like you saw, you can add what we call ghost note, which is basically be a note with a lower velocity. This is really depends. Another way to use a clap, it will be usually you just play them at the end of the bar, and you will add, for example, some delay and reverb to have this kind of. Now often it can be used on every beat. This I recommend to use more like a 909 clap, because it just works perfectly. Let me put back the reverb. This usually, if you use the 909 open hat with the 909 clap both together like this, it's worked perfectly. This works as well to use offbeat like an open hat. Why not? And finally, you can use it to build up. So I'm gonna put 4 bar lengths. This I'm gonna just show it quickly, but we need a full tutorial for this. Press B to have to draw note. B again, and I'm just gonna duplicate. And you can just like when you are here, you click with B and you hold Option, and you can draw like kind of a velocity curve. Don't forget the first one, like me, and create these things which is usually used for build up. can use for transition as well, but usually it's used for build up. You can play with the decay, a high pass filter, you know, like you modulate a high pass filter or you modulate the decay. I will need a whole tutorial just to talk about clap build up. You can do it actually with a snare, and we're gonna talk a bit about snare in a minute. But yeah, claps as well can be used a lot for the break to add a bit of like tension. DJs use a lot with the Pioneer RMX. Like, imagine you will have and then you have that going into a lot of reverb. So yeah, that gives you an idea how you can build the pattern. Okay, we're gonna go back to this one but without the ghost note. Now snare. This is very similar to clap. You can basically play it every 2 beats and you can do the same kind of build up, the same kind of effect with the clap. It's just a different type. Like basically everything what I said to the clap apply to the snare, all the shifting, all the playing with the pattern, it's everything the same. Again, it's used a lot for the build up or like to play at the end of, maybe not that often, but now let's talk about tom perk. Usually, in most cases, you will use them more like as a syncopated element. So like something playing a little bit more in between, like not too much, like more like sparse a little bit. Now, if you're making more like deep hypnotic techno, you can actually use them to create the groove. I made a video about it. I put the link in the description. If you're doing more like melodic techno as well, you can use it as the groove. You can play usually like this is usually working well. Usually in dub techno, it's the same. It's more like sparse. You're gonna have it just one playing here and there. Okay, finally, let's talk about the crash, which I will usually just add a bit of reverb. Usually, this is more like for transition. You have it playing at the beginning of the bar. Can be great when you have at the beginning of the breakdown to add transition. To create SFX as well with. It's worked well. Then finally, I didn't talk about the Rimshot. Rimshots again can be used same as the tom, a little bit here and there. We usually a bit of delay, reverb. If you do hypnotic techno, maybe use it as a closer hat, like the 16 closer hat, playing at the lower velocity with maybe a velocity of beat. It worked well. But yeah, here already get you going to have a solid groove. And yeah, hope you learn a few things here and there. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to support me, you can grab the sample pack I use for this tutorial, my Peak Time 3 Techno sample pack. You can go on my Patreon, becoming a Patreon member, and grab actually the whole project with some extra MIDI files. Thank you very much for watching and see you soon. Bye bye.